Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Kratom Sobriety Podcast. This is episode 83, and my name is Chris. I'm here with Jacob.
How are you?
I'm pretty good this week. I started a new job. I'm feeling good.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. How's the new job going for you?
It's a lot of stress, which can be bad for someone in recovery, but I think I'm handling it okay.
That can be challenging, especially in the earlier recovery days, but you've probably got over 2 months now, right?
I do. I'm coming up on 3 months. So
Awesome.
it's very exciting. I'm very
That's
glad
great.
I'm at 3 months instead of where I was 3 months ago. So
Um, I'm very glad you're here on the other side of it with us too. That's awesome. This week on the podcast, we have a guest, Frank. So Frank was taking the infamous kratom kava drink. He got up to 24 of the things a day, 24 a day. He's an attorney and has a bit of cash, so he was able to support a habit like that. But that's just crazy to think about.
24 a day. I was using, as people might know, 12 to 16, and it absolutely destroyed my life. I
I
can
thought you
just
had the
imagine.
record. I really did. I'm sorry to laugh about it. I thought you had the record.
No, we have to laugh about it. Yeah, it was bad. So I can't even imagine
Yeah.
24. And I felt like that amount was just devastating financially for me. So 24, I can't even fathom the cost of that.
It sounds like it's around $250 a day. It's a lot of money. It's
That
more
is
than it's
yeah,
probably a mortgage on 2 to 3 houses for most people a month.
it's a big.
You usually don't hear of a kratom addiction costing that amount. I've heard like 100, and people get shocked about that. But with extracts, I think in the kava kratom drinks, it's easy to get up to the higher amounts and thus spend a lot of money. But 24 a day and $250 a day is a lot of money.
You know what? Now that I think about it, I don't even know what I would have done or how many I would have taken a day if I could have afforded that many, to be honest. I was reaching my limit at 12 to 16,
Yeah.
but I was just so in my addiction that who knows, if I had the money, I might have stretched it that far.
Oh, I definitely would have. When I was doing the strong extracts and I was got up to 4 and it was bankrupting me too. I'm pretty sure I would have went deeper if I could have. So
That-
I'm so glad to not be there. This actually leads in really well to our topic for this week, which is the dangers of comparing your kratom addiction towards another's. It's ironic because we were just comparing our experience to Frank's experience, but it's not ironic in a sense because what I'm really getting at is this is when you look at your usage and you say, I'm only using one extract shot a day, or I'm only taking a couple grams a day, or I'm only doing this or that, but I'm still having all these consequences, but I'm not as bad as this person, or I'm not as bad as this person. And that can be really dangerous because with addiction, there's usually someone that's doing better than you, and there's usually someone that's doing worse than you. And I think that's just the reality. Even in recovery, there's people that I'm still like, man, I wish I could get to that level. And it takes time and it takes work. And the same with addiction. There's usually someone that's a worse addict than even the person that you know that you think's the worst.
Another thing I struggled with the kratom was that it is legal in a lot of places, and it's marketed a lot of times as this healthy alternative to things. So
Yes.
when I was in my addiction and it was ruining my life, I lost my job, I crashed my car, so many bad things happened. I would just think, it's not heroin. It's not so many other things. Meanwhile, it was destroying everything. But I somehow convinced myself that it was okay because it was legal and it wasn't something that sounded worse on paper, which is heroin. But it did exactly the same things. And the withdrawal was horrible. That kept me
It,
in it probably for longer than I should have been in it.
I agree. When I was first started, I got into it because it was touted as something that would be good for like alcohol cravings. And I was sober from alcohol for a year, or I don't know, maybe not even a year. Eventually, it turned into its own horrible addiction. But in the beginning, I was still going to meetings and stuff, and I considered myself sober. It wasn't really until I found extracts and went deep with that I saw what it could actually do. But yeah, I could have, and I did compare. There were a lot of times when I was drinking or doing this or using these drugs, my life was like such a mess, and it's not that bad. I'm just spending too much money, or I'm just taking this stuff every day, and I feel like crap every morning. But it's not that bad.
And when I went to rehab for kratom, I even felt awkward in rehab saying that I was there for kratom because I just thought no one will understand how I'm here in rehab on something that you can buy at the gas station. But then I heard someone when I was in recovery say, if it doesn't really matter how much you're taking or what you're taking, if you feel like it's destroying your life, then you have a problem with it. It's your call. And that's absolutely what it did. And that really clarified it for me. If you feel like it's a problem in your life, even if you're drinking, if you're only having 2 drinks a week, but you feel like it's destroying your life, then it's a problem. And so that helped clarify it for me.
Yeah, I work with the guy that he told me he never had a drinking problem or anything, but he hasn't had a drink in like 10 years just because he felt like every time he even had 2 or 3 drinks, he just didn't like how he felt and whatever. So yeah, that's a really good point too. If something isn't serving you, then it's usually a good time to get it out of your life. And with kratom, the problem is that's oftentimes when people realize that it's also causes physical dependence, and they have to deal with that, which is its whole other animal. Versus if you're maybe teetering on the edge of alcoholism, for example, there's usually not a physical component to it yet.
Yeah, exactly. And that just brought me so much back to being physically and mentally addicted to the kratom. And withdrawing from it is so hard, but it is so worth it 90 days out. The first month is really difficult, but there's light on the other side. Thank goodness. 'Cause it was bleak for a couple of years there when I was really in my addiction.
I always have the same experience. I went through that cold turkey withdrawal like a ton of times, and it's really bad, but it gets better. Even like the worst days, it gets better every day, or at least it did for me. And it sucks terribly, but it's not like a benzo or like alcohol where it could actually kill you because of
Right.
like the risk of seizure and other things. But with kratom withdrawal, typically, that's not the case.
I found it was really bad for a month, but every day I would get little glimmers of it getting better. Even if the whole day wasn't good, I would get just little rays of light, rays of sunshine. Oh, maybe there is hope. And then that just kept happening. It kept getting better and better.
Yeah, same. I always found something that seemed to get better every day, and it was enough to keep going. I think with that, we'll get on to our interview with Frank.
I can't wait to listen.
All right.
Hello, welcome to another interview of the Kratom Sobriety Podcast. Tonight I'm sitting down with Frank. Can you tell us about yourself? Introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. My name is Frank. I'm a 48-year-old lawyer. I live outside of Chicago. I'm single, no children. I'm divorced. Pretty average American household, 2 parents, a lot of love, never wanted for anything. I had a great childhood, pretty good career. Everything was going real well. And then I got caught up in the kratom.
I read part of your story on Reddit, and I think it's fair to say that you had quite a bad experience, maybe one of the most extreme cases, at least the numbers wise. I'm going to try not to gawk at it. The numbers you were consuming were quite large at the end there, but
Yeah, it was bonkers.
when did you quit kratom?
So the last time I used kratom was right before I detoxed in the hospital. So this would be the second week of April of 2024. And I'm sure we'll get into it later. I detoxed. I spent about 4.5 days in the hospital, was let out, went to rehab, but that was the last time I used any kratom product.
Okay, that was about
So
4 months ago.
Yeah, if we want to put my sober date on, I would say April 15th,
Yeah.
around that time.
Before you got addicted to the kava-kratom tonics, I know you were a kratom user. What was that like, and when was that?
Great, sure. I first heard of kratom, I want to say it was 2016 or 2017. There was a lot of news going on in the internet around that time frame about, I think it was the FDA was talking about making it a Schedule 1 or 2, whatever makes it illegal. And I remember reading the story about it. And then, of course, there were at least one, probably more kratom marketing groups pushing against that. The saying was, it's a member of the coffee family and it helps people with pain and people get off of drugs and blah, 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 blah. So that's when I first heard of it, 2016 or 2017. I went and before kratom, I drank a little bit in college and in law school and in high school. And I experimented with smoking some weed and stuff like that. But I wasn't a real big drug user. But I remember just seeing this and I thought, I remember just being curious. And so I went into a head shop and I bought capsules. I don't remember the number. They sell them in various jars or whatever. I remember I took one, nothing happened. Took two, nothing happened. So for the next month or so, I would just pop another here or there. And then at some point I just said, this is garbage. This stuff doesn't work. It was whatever. And I was about to go on my way. And then one day I remembered very well, there were probably about 6 capsules left. And I thought, the hell with it. I'm just going to go ahead and take these and get rid of the bottle. And I want to say 40 minutes later, it hit me. And I said, oh, what it reminded me of the first time I had done, and I've only heard one other person say this. Somebody had said it reminded them of Ritalin. And I had taken Ritalin 2 times recreationally. And I remember when the kratom hit after about 45 minutes, it felt like that. I was very focused. I was very energetic. I was very talkative and I was flying. I thought, wow. And I didn't think of any of the consequences or really do any research on it, which is silly on my part. But in any event, from I want to say late 2016, 2017 to about 2022, I used kratom off and on. When I quit, I was getting up to about 40 grams a day, maybe more. So it wasn't a small amount. So when I quit, there was some pretty bad withdrawals that I just gutted through. I would probably go 3 or 4 months without, and then I would start up again. So that was my experience with the powder. I think there's the extracts out there. I didn't really mess around with those because I think the prices, we'll get into this too, but at the time I looked at the extract prices and I'm like, that's ridiculous. I'm not paying that. So that's how I started. That's how I started with the kratom powder.
What brought you to trying the kratom kava tonics?
I saw them in the head shop. The one thing that got me, and I don't know if it's still sold this way, but the particular product I was using, this is really what nailed me. I looked at it. It was on a cardboard stand right next to the cash register. And on either side of the cardboard stand, they had university decals. And it said developed by University of Southern California and University of Texas, both on the stand that they were sold in. So I thought, and I asked the guy behind the counter, what's that? And he said, it's kava mixed with kratom. And I thought, I've already been taking some kratom, so surely I can do this. And look, it's affiliated with these major universities. So I remember I bought 3 bottles and I put one down and that hit me immediately. It was the same sort of euphoric energy. Wow. Talkative. So that's how that started out. I remember thinking, I'm like, how do I work this? Because when I used to take kratom, I would give myself about 3.5 hours in between dosing. So that's what I thought with the kava-kratom drinks, the tonics. So I would take a few hours, then all of a sudden I'd take 2 and then wait a couple hours and then a third. And that just went on and on. And eventually in the early part, I was taking about 6 or 7, I want to say in the first month. And that's when I noticed some of the problems began. Go into those.
Yeah.
At first, the corner of my left eye was very red and very sore. And then my neck and my shoulder, the skin just became very inflamed and sore. I had no idea what it was about. And I went to the doctor, and the doctor was, oh, you just have terrible eczema. So here's some steroids to help with the swelling, and here's some other stuff. And it went away, and I didn't know what it was. And that's when I started Googling the tonic and the side effects and symptoms. And I came away with kava really dries you out. And I saw a lot of people reporting that. So I just chalked it up to that. So yeah, I had started with just a couple every few hours apart. And then rapidly within the first few weeks, I was up to 6 a day. And I started having the skin issues.
They were definitely affiliated with 3 universities. I think the advertisement I saw was like the official tonic of these sports teams. And I know at least one of them, and more might have pulled out of those deals because of the controversy with these. When was this? When did you first start?
Yeah, I want to say I probably tried one the first time in 2021, but I really, like late 2022 is when I started to get heavily into it. And then last summer was really bad throughout to the spring of this year. So we started with some skin effects when I was doing 6,
Yeah.
but eventually I was up to 9 or 10, and I started getting really bad eye infections. And I went all of last summer in sunglasses. I just couldn't leave. I had horrible eye infections in both eyes. And again, when you go online and you do the Googles and you put in the products, you come with a list of symptoms and side effects. And people were reporting styes in their eyes, infections, terrible dry skin. That came next, where just the ends of my toes started splitting. They looked like I had big rivers
Wow.
in between my toes. And they're now healed. But for a long, like they wouldn't heal. They became very painful, very sore. Of course, there was dry skin everywhere flaking off of me. So yeah, that was about the 9 or 10 a day. And eventually I got up to a case. And so at a case a day, I was having the same problems. I'm super ashamed to admit this, but I know there are other people that have said this. There was a lot of vomiting when you're on that many. I think the body just says, oh, that's too much, and shoots it back up. The way I had it was, I'm not proud to say this, but I think my mentality, I was so deep into it at that time that my mentality was, oh, I threw up. Good. My body got rid of it. So there's room for more.
Yeah.
And that's the way I looked at it. And I remember I told myself, if I get to vomiting 3 times, then I have to be done. I've heard wild stories of people collecting their vomit and just like recycling it too. Yeah, that was happening. So all of those sort of health effects, there was a skin problem, there was the vomiting, there were the eye infections. And then once I got above a case a day, I started getting awful insomnia. I started getting awful withdrawals. Like I couldn't make it through the night. I'd wake up every couple hours, terrible withdrawals. And guess what's the only thing that fixed it?
Another one.
Yeah, another one. And so I really got to the point where first thing in the morning, I was throwing them down. Throughout the night, I was throwing them down. And probably I want to say within the last 2 weeks before I detox, I maybe slept 10 hours for 2 weeks. I'm lucky to be alive. It was crazy.
It is quite serious. Yeah. The skin problems are really notorious with these products, and it can be attributed to the kava, but the kava that's in there is extremely extracted and concentrated. But even kava drinkers that drink a lot of kava will have some of these problems, though not to the extent with cracked feet and styes in both eyes. And I know one time you were either planned to quit or you forced to quit because you went to a town where they didn't have it. How was that? What happened that time?
Yeah, so this is late last summer, early spring. I cycled through three different head shops. One was open at 9 in the morning. One was open at 10. One was open at 11. Like, I knew the times they were open. I tried to cycle between them to be like, maybe they won't see that I'm such like a junkie for this. But of course, everybody knows, right? It's whatever. And so it got to this one period where it just wasn't around. Nobody had it. None of the three. Now, Chicago's a big city. I'm sure there's plenty of places, but I wasn't driving 20 miles for it. I won't go into the brand I was using, but they had, I wouldn't call them knockoff brands, but very similar brands that were advertised as kava-kratom. And they're always a little more diluted, it felt, but that's all there was. And so for a week, I was on just powdered kratom and those other, the other brand, I would call it sort of the off brand. And even using that without the product I was taking, the withdrawals were still terrible. It was still terrible. I probably had an awful week, just 3 or 4, probably an awful 5 to 7 days actually, of being without that product and taking the substitute and the powdered. It didn't help. But after about a week, I finally got through and I was like, you know what? I'm going to stop with the tonics. I'm just going to go back to powdered because I knew I would be having withdrawals from that. And I felt good finally getting off of the one tonic. So I figured if I was just dealing with the plant and the flower, that would be a lot easier to get off. And I was off for a couple of weeks. Like the new places, they got new stock and I wouldn't touch it. I even told the people there, hey, I quit.
Yeah.
Then I think there was just a period around Thanksgiving or Christmas time where I was traveling to see family and I stopped in a gas station. And that's how it goes. There's just one, right? I'll just have one. One's fine. And away I was. And so that's how I was forced to get off it because it wasn't around. And I had a terrible week of withdrawals. And I was able to stay off for a couple months. And then I made the silly decision to start up again. And it never slowed down. And when I started back up, I ramped up to a case. And then I was at 2 cases not long after that.
You consumed a lot of these over time. Did you see the formula change?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. When I first started, let's back up a little bit. Last summer, I don't know if you've heard about any of the bad batches that went along. Does that sound familiar?
Exploding, fermented.
Yeah, okay. So now there was the exploding one that just tasted like garbage. Them anyway, because I had them, I wasn't going to go return them. And that made you sicker. And I want to say in that bad batch, that stuck around for a few months. And then they came and I think they switched it because the caps changed colors and this product started varying some of their formulas and they distinguish it by the color of the caps is how you would know. And I think the stuff that I was using at the end, it wasn't the stuff that I had started with. I couldn't tell you whether it was stronger or weaker. I just recall it being a different feeling. So I'm certain that in the probably year or 2 years that I was heavily using, they cycled through a couple different formulas.
Yeah, that's been widely reported by a lot of users in that time frame. What kind of financial havoc did this bring into your life?
Yeah, great question. When I went into rehab, and one of the things you do in rehab, I don't know if it's universal, it was the first and hopefully only time I ever go to rehab, but one of the things you do is you sit down and you say, what is your addictions or your bad habits? What have they cost you? Mm-hmm. And that's in terms of loved ones and work and relationships and health and of course money. And I had to sit down and to do that exercise. And I thought, let's just pull out the calculator. And boy, when I was at 2 cases a day, they were about $10 a bottle. I was spending up to $250 a day. And that's in a 24-hour period. Because by the time 9 a.m. rolled around the next morning, I was already in the parking lot of one of those head shops. And so he would come out, open the door, and he would just have my cases ready. If you're looking at $200 a day, the way I did the math, and in rehab, by the way, my health insurance didn't pay for that. I paid that all out of pocket. The rehab was like 18 grand. The 4 or 5 day hospital stay was another 25 grand. I think all in all, and when you add in the rehab and the doctors, like I'm in probably 75 to 85 grand in a year and a half. It was crazy. I can't believe I was spending that much money.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I make a good living. I was able, it's not a smart way to spend money, but it didn't bankrupt me. I didn't go into credit card debt. I paid everything cash. But I'd love to have that 70 or 80 grand back for sure.
Of course. Did you always just buy it from the head shops, or did you ever get the cases from the manufacturer itself?
Yeah, I always went to the head shops, and that was just because I didn't trust the mail or know how long it was going to take. And when you use as many as I did, you want to be able to just run down the street and get more. And I have a head shop within 100 yards. So it was more convenient to do that. And plus you start to develop a little bit of a relationship with the people that work in the head shop, and they always see you and they know your name. And actually one of them was super helpful to me. I went in and I remember he said to me, it was like 9:30 in the morning because he was always late, that guy. But he looked at me and he just said, "Hey man, how's your health?"
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Fine. Why do you ask?" He goes, "Because you look terrible. Are you sleeping? Whatever." And I'm like, holy smokes, I must look terrible. And just to go back, my job as an attorney, I work in a defense firm, but I work from home most of the time. If I'm not in trial, if I'm not meeting with clients, if I'm not interviewing witnesses or going to accidents, if I'm not doing that kind of thing, I work from home all day. And I probably try 3 or 4 cases a year. So the reason I'm saying that is because and I'm not married and I was just shut in drinking the stuff. But the reason I say that is because it's not like somebody from work was like, "Hey, you don't look so good," because I wasn't really seeing anybody. I got to the point where I was pretty much shut in. Like I was working and I was drinking my tonics. And that's what I did. And finally, when that guy said it, I thought, boy, I must really look terrible. And boy, I really feel terrible with this half an inch split between my toes.
Wow. Ouch.
Both big toes was insane. So that's when, and that's when I started thinking that I need to stop. Like it was getting out of control.
Did you lose a lot of weight?
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's probably the worst part about rehab is I gained it all back. And then, I'm sure like a lot of people, like I wasn't eating because that affects the buzz. So I'd be drinking all throughout the day, all throughout the night. And I didn't want to eat because I didn't want to ruin it. And when you're going all day, like you never want to eat. So I probably lost about 40 pounds. And then immediately when I got sober, I just stopped. I couldn't stop eating sugar. Reese's peanut butter cups killed me.
We have that in common. I've gained some weight since I quit. Before we talk about your hospitalization, being up for long periods of time and just drinking these on it, were you working during those blocks of time, or were you like, what were you doing?
Some of the times I was, but then other times, like if it was in the middle of the night, I was just trying to watch TV to do something to calm down, to go to bed, because the anxiety was just awful.
Yeah, it's
just what's interesting. And I remember talking about this with some other people in rehab. When it came to like professional consequences is the word, like I had probably one of my best years financially, work-wise. I'm not saying that use this drug because I was successful, but I didn't have any, and I think that sort of prolonged it because I wasn't having trouble. And all of a sudden I'm getting this promotion and I'm making this or doing that. And it just seemed all cool in school.
Yeah. Another thing, I made 10% more the year that I was on it. And then the year I went off of it, not only I lost 15% of my income, and then that's when inflation hit. I felt, wow, I'm broke on top of the productivity. Now it's all even out, and the cost on your health and everything else with the addiction. But it's not uncommon. I've heard that same story, and I do think it prolongs people's use. But
yeah, because I don't know what your background is or what you know about. I'm sure right now you probably know a hell of a lot more about addiction than me. But I always just had this vision And I think that's why I waited so long. It's the only people that go to rehab are people that can't like hold a job. Or they're like, they can't pay their mortgage, or they get thrown out, or they go to jail. And I was like, I don't have any of those problems. But it was like, boy, you idiot, you have all these other terrible problems staring you in your face, like spending all this money and all these health issues. So yeah, I think that probably prolonged it.
I know of pilots that have extreme drinking habits and a beautiful wife and home. And this was in the kratom world, but have a horrible case of alcoholism. So it does the way addiction presents itself in people's lives. It's not all stereotypical.
I just remember, I don't know how old you are, but I just remember like the Dare ads as a kid and it was just like, you're going to be a junkie and you're going to be like living on it in the alley. And it's never, a lot of junkies are actually very productive. And I know that from firsthand experience now.
I grew up in the 70s. So yeah, this podcast, sometimes I cringe. I look in the mirrors. Am I turning into Nancy Reagan somehow? Talking about the dangers of kratom.
I know.
And it's not even a real unquote drug, but it obviously a case like yours, this is serious business. And I know eventually the way you were able to quit, unfortunately, you were hospitalized. So what did that look like?
The hospitalization itself, I don't remember that much of it. Just a couple of parts I'll go over. What was more interesting was the way I got in the hospital. I knew, man, the week before I went in, I just knew I had to do something. And probably for the last 20 years, I've seen a psychiatrist just for anxiety and depression stuff. So I just had a regular guy and he was great. We had a great relationship. Everything was always going fine. And then I remember thinking, I got to talk to him. Mm-hmm. I got to talk to him about this because I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get help. I'm not just going to drop into an AA meeting because like I felt I wasn't sleeping. I went literally 10 hours of sleep, 15 hours of sleep over a 10-day period or something. So I was desperate. And after being up all night and using kratom all night and the tonics, thank God my psychiatrist, his office is 2 blocks from my home. So I walked over there with the empty bottle and I just remember shaking the whole way over there. And I said to his assistant, I think I need to go to the hospital. And she said, why? And I said, I'm going to talk to the doctor about it, but I don't feel good. And she said, okay, go sit on the couch. And he came out and he said, what's going on? So I said, I've been taking this stuff and I don't feel good. And I showed him the bottle and he went insane on me. What are you doing taking this? Do you know what this can do to you? You didn't tell me. This is why I fire patients that don't. I'm like, I can't believe this guy's screaming at me. I'm like, and he's going off. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? He said, I guess you have to go downstairs and wait for the ambulance then. And I looked at him like, are you fucking serious? Really? And he said, come back to my office. And he looks at the bottle and he said, somebody died just last month using this, but I don't know anything about it or how to fix it. I'm going to call you an ambulance. And we called the EMTs. Some firefighters came. They were great guys. And my psychiatrist, I just remember they're strapping me into the gurney and he is berating me in front of these paramedics. He's, look at him. This is a well-respected lawyer in this community. And look at him. He's a mess. He used to be normal and look at him. And I was too out of it to even care. So that's how I got to the hospital. And the other interesting thing is, and I think there's other people I've read about that had this problem, is I get in there and this doctor is the ER doctor now. He said, what's going on? What'd you take? And I told him, and he just looks at me and he shrugs and he goes, yeah, I don't know what to do about that. I got to go call somebody. I'll be back. Because he had no idea how to treat kratom related issues. And he wandered off. And at that point, my body was throbbing. Like my legs were beating. It was the most awful feeling. They gave me a sedative that put me to sleep. And the next thing I knew, I was waking up the following morning at 6:15, just in sheer withdrawal because nobody knew what to do. And I remember screaming, just screaming, I am suffering. Somebody help me. Because it was the worst. It wasn't pain like I got hit in the face with an axe.
Yeah.
But it was it was awful. And it wasn't until later that night that an orderly came in and he said, put this under your tongue. So he gave me Suboxone. And within 5 minutes, I was like, all the withdrawal, all of that was gone. I was still very shaky. And I don't know what that was about, but they'd always come in and check my hands. So I was shaky. And then 4 days of eating hospital food. And thank God I had my laptop there. I tried to work a little bit, but I just called some of my law partners and just said, listen, I'm in the hospital. I'll explain later. I'm going to be here for a few days. Can you just run interference for me? And they did. And they're great. I work with great people. But yeah, finally, like the last day, and like it was really weird for anybody who's detoxed. Maybe they'll understand what I'm saying. But I just thought when you went to the hospital, people dote on you. But that's not really what happens. They make sure you're not going to die. And then they just throw you in a room until you get better. And they come in every few hours and check your blood pressure and pulse and give you your meds. But that's really what it was. Like, I didn't talk to a physician really until the final day when this woman came and she said, I'm Dr. So-and-so. I've been handling your care. I have had to work with other doctors because the stuff you are taking, nobody has any experience with it. But you need rehab. And I said, okay, what are you giving me that's allowing me to not go through withdrawal? She said, it's Suboxone. And I knew what that was. I was horrified that I was taking it. And I thought, she said, I'm going to give you a prescription for 2 weeks. And I thought, boy, I need to find a program or do something fast because I never want to go through this again. And yeah, she released me with a 2-week script of Suboxone and then it was subtype of alleged anti-panic drug. I can't remember the name of it. Yeah, it didn't really work so well anyway. It's hydroxyzine, I think. Anyway, doesn't really matter. And so that was it. They released me. They referred me out and said, best of luck, kid. And I had to find a rehab place that would work around my schedule because I wasn't doing inpatient. And they kept saying, it's okay. Your employer can't fire you, these rules. And I'm like, I don't have that kind of job. The people that fire me are not my boss. It's my clients and they'll feel bad, but I live in a very tough legal market. And if I disappear, somebody's going to come take my clients. And so I had to work. So it took me a while to find a way around that.
What kind of outpatient program did you find?
So it ended up being an evening program for professionals, whatever that means. And it was like 2 social workers and a psychiatrist with addiction specialties. Whatever. I think that's how they term it. He was a great guy. He was like, listen, I'm going to put you on Suboxone. This is how you take it. This is what it does. Educated me on that. And that was it. That did it for me. And so it was a night. I'm sorry, just to finish the rest of it. It was a night program. It was 3 hours a night, 3 days a week for 8 weeks.
Okay. What kind of curriculum was it? 12-step based or?
Yeah, that was part of my critique of it. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because it wasn't really anything. There was no structure to it.
Oh, wow.
Nobody explained, we're going to do this and we're going to do this. And then this is the curriculum. It wasn't like that. It was just like, today we're going to be talking about some exercise about Today we're going to have an art exercise where you draw what your road to recovery, what you think it should look like. It was like that. And then they would say, we also encourage you to go to a meeting every week, whether it's NA or AA or any of those. And I was the only one with the kratom habit in there.
That was
all
question.
Dudes. They were all alcoholic, which is fine, whatever. But they all had the same stuff in common and it was all in sync. And they were talking about how much they hate airports because they go to airport bars. And one of the tricks is get there late so you're not tempted to go to the bar and you got to go right to your plane. And I was thinking, like, oh, that's the last thing I want to do. I want to be early. I'm not going to rush. It's just stuff like that. I was the only, I guess they classified me as having opiate use disorder, but there was everybody else. It was just alcohol. Great people, but they said, go to programs, but there was really no structure. And like I said, this is my first rehab, hopefully my last. And I remember the very first week, I got very defensive with one of the counselors because we were doing an activity and I forget what she asked me and I answered. And she said, that's very common for people going through recovery the first time. And I said, excuse me? She said, the first time. I said, there's not going to be a second time. And she said, I've heard that a lot. I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm like, I don't really appreciate you putting a ceiling on me. I'm never coming back here. Never.
Hold on to that and wanting to do it right the first time. It is common for an addiction for there to be relapses, but it's not guaranteed. And there is no reason to have a ceiling on yourself. So keep that attitude because you don't have to redo that. There is no reason.
Right. That's what I thought. And everybody around me had been to rehab before. So they're all like laughing like this guy. But what I said to the counselors, I said, just do a thought experiment. I said, can you imagine a world where somebody who's never been an addict to anything, maybe nicotine, but that world where he or she picks up one drug, falls into it head over heels, makes a huge mistake, but then quits and never does it again and goes about their life. I'm like, can you even imagine that world? Because I think there are people like that in the world. Those are very rare people. I'm like, okay, but I think I got my point across. I'm going to stop talking now.
Yeah. But what was your timeline of feeling normal and the withdrawals, and when you could say by weeks or days or months?
Oh, yeah. That's a good question. The withdrawals, and I understand you're on the Reddit forums. So there's a lot of sort of debate about Suboxone.
Yes.
I get it. I get the pros. I get the cons. Everybody should do what they want. For me, it was a lifesaver. My withdrawals and my cravings were gone immediately. When I took that, and I knew, I was like, that morning I woke up in the hospital, some of the other times I've gotten off of kratom, that one period where it seemingly every store ran out of it. I know how bad the withdrawals were. And I was just like, if there is something that can just fix my withdrawals, I will make it through and never use again. But I got to have something that does it. And Suboxone did it for me. And so anyway, my withdrawals went away immediately, but what did not go away immediately were I had really bad anxiety attacks on the kratom kava drinks. And even when they were gone, I found myself like pulling off the side of the road with awful panic attacks. And those were going on, boy, still within 8 weeks of quitting, I was still having those. It's only really been the last 5 or 6 weeks that I've felt like completely normal. Like all of this is a bad dream and it never happened. And I remember being hopeless. I didn't consider suicide, but I remember thinking to myself, this is why people kill themselves. I just knew it. And I just knew it. I'm like, okay, so this is why it happens. And then when I thought about the amount I was taking I'm drinking it 24 hours a day, basically through the night. That's how somebody ODs and died. And I was right on the edge. So anyway, all of that is gone. It seems like a terrible dream. I don't take Suboxone tablets. Once I got my program ended mid-June, I want to say, and then I had to find a new. Obviously, I didn't go back to the psychiatrist who berated me for coming to him for help.
That relationship was severed.
Yeah, it ended. I think it was a mutual parting of the ways. So I found a new guy who's great. I love him. He is fantastic. And I went in, and I won't turn this into a big thing about Suboxone, but the biggest problem for Suboxone with me was just getting a prescription filled and the way the pharmacy treated you. The availability of it was always out. It always had to be ordered. If you knew you were going to be out in 2 days and you came 2 days early to fill it, they would look at you like, oh no, this is scheduled. You can't have this. It was a strange sort of simultaneous experience of being looked at like I was a junkie, yet having to have the nuclear codes just to get the medication from behind the corner. It was just awful. And I was telling my new doctor this, and that's when we talked about Sublocade, which I'm sure is just a shot, which slowly releases Suboxone through your body for 30 days. And so That is what I am on now. I've had 3 rounds of it. The doctor told me, this doctor and other doctors said, once you're clean, they recommend you keep using, if you're using medication assisted treatment, for about 12 months. Because my understanding is the studies show that long-term use of the medication leads to less recidivism is really the wrong word, but relapse. So my plan is to just keep doing that and then eventually just get off this, which I assume they whittle down the shot. I already think they're starting to make the amounts I get every month less.
Yeah, we hear a lot of good things about the Sublocade shot and that it's easier on people's systems. And I'm not a doctor. From what I read from Google Scholar, there is like the sweet spot. If you take it, use it too short term, it's not as effective. And then maybe if you take it too long, there's other issues. Just listening to your doctor is a good thing. And on the podcast, we try to be medication assisted treatment friendly because it's such a lightning rod in the quitting community. People have really strong feelings.
I'm shocked by that, by the way. I really was. Yeah. I was like, I assumed I would come in and people would be like, whatever works, bro. Good for you. Go get him. And then you see it's like somebody uses Suboxone and somebody attacks them. And I don't, whatever, but it's shocking how diversive that topic is.
Pretty
divisive. Sorry.
Suboxone is like a political party or a football.
Yes.
Like people, you're either, if you're for it, then you're like on team Sublocade. And if you're against it, then you're for, and I think it's tied into the people's beliefs around vaccinations and their doubts about doctors and pushing medications.
It's a great way to put it. It is like a political team or a sports team.
Yes.
Yeah, it really is.
Suboxone isn't for everybody. We think of it as a last resort, but it can be very effective and it can really make people's lives a lot better in the difference between ongoing disaster or overwhelming success. And we're not sponsored by the farm to say this. It's an effective drug. Last week we had a guest on it. They abused it. And then they also found that the withdrawals were harder on them. So for that person, Suboxone wasn't the right choice. But somebody like you, it's been 4 months. How is your life overall? Paint us a picture. Hopefully it sounds like your life is turned around. Things are positive.
So much fun. I remember I'm really close with my mother. And I remember when I was going through the hospital, right after the hospital, like I remember just telling her, I just want to feel normal. I don't want to be high. I want to be normal. And I am normal now. Every time I go, I don't want to be the lightning rod, but every time I go and I see my doctor to discuss the Sublocade or the shot, I thank him because I am back to normal. My life was a hell of my own making, for sure. Probably the worst part about my life was, besides all the health issues and outrageous gobs of money, was my home looked like a trap house. Like it looked like I lived in a crackdown. I didn't clean. It was awful. And now I have flowers. I clean. It's nice. I'm happy to live here. I just have my life back and I'm just normal. And like I said, it all seems like a really awful nightmare. But what I do try to do is I do try to follow up on the Reddit sub and help if I can. I really try not to give unwanted advice, but it's just, it serves a couple of purposes for me. It makes me remember exactly what it was like because at the end of the day, everybody has the same story. Everybody has, between that and the quitting kratom sub, which I also bounce through. I see people who have the same symptoms and I'm like, good God, I feel bad for this person suffering. And then I think, is there anything I can tell them to help? And then I think, thank God I'm out of it and I never have to go again. So that's really how I manage it. I can tell you I have no temptations, no thoughts of using it. You could put 5 cases in here and I wouldn't touch it. It would just sit I'm very anti this particular product and the whole sort of industry in general, which is hard because I'm a live and let live guy. But at the same time, like this stuff is vicious. And anyway, and so I know I've only been clean, 4 or 5 months, I guess is what, but to me, I'm going to be like this forever. Never going back.
Yeah. Common things that sometimes people have triggers with is they open up a suitcase and they'll have the product sitting there, or they'll go on to town and they'll see it sitting there on the counter and they're tired because they have jet lag. Anything in place that you have to maybe inoculate yourself from maybe acting on an urge like that?
I keep a lot of Reese's peanut butter cups. And if I were ever tempted, I would just eat the sugar, because when I got clean for those first, I wanted nothing more than sugar. And I think that's the good substitute. The other thought is not a lot of people all of a sudden at 46 just wake up in there and so like a lot of close people don't know about this. Mm-hmm. And it's like but there's a couple people that I know that I can talk to that if I really felt the draw and there was no sugar or that wasn't working or something like that, like I have people I can call. I have a plan in place for that. But I've been really pleased with the outcome. It was a terrible time, but I think I came out certainly a lot deeper of a person, not necessarily wiser, but I think I've learned a lot emotionally. I never want to go through it again, but
yeah, hold on to that. Let's lighten it up a little bit. We like to ask people some fun stuff about their personal preferences and stuff. What kind of music do you listen to?
So I'm one of those people that, I don't know if you are, but I was born in the mid to late 70s. So I am a high school product of Nirvana and Guns N' Roses and Seattle alt music. So I love that stuff. I love the old Dr. Dre, NWA kind of stuff. And for me, my musical taste is frozen steadily below the year 2004.
Yeah.
Anything after that, I couldn't tell you. But if you went into my playlist, it's that. And I like some classic rock too. I'm upset because I think rock is dead. I don't know where to find good rock anymore. Certainly not like when I was in school.
Yeah, maybe the Foo Fighters a little bit.
Yeah, I do the Foo Fighters.
Yeah. I'm a little frozen like that. I had two stages. This was high school in the mid 80s. So I had the goth thing with The Cure and the
yes,
and
great music.
And then while you were doing the Seattle sound, which all my friends were doing at the time in the early 90s when I was in college, I had this Grateful Dead phase. I was following Jerry Garcia around when he was still alive. You? So I had to discover the grunge a couple decades later.
Yeah. Oh, a Deadhead. Interesting.
Yeah. So I'm a little bit like you. I'm a little bit libertarian, but I agree with you that I do think this industry is fairly predatory. I don't know what the solution is. We can't prohibit this. That's not going to solve it. We don't need anybody in jail or prison, but I don't have much hope for the industry reforming itself.
No, I agree. And it's a lot of time that this happens in my law practice where I just have to say to a client, sometimes there are no good answers. This is the art. There's only less bad. And you're right. It's not going to clean itself up. There was I forget his name, the journalist who did, do you know what I'm talking about? Did a piece on. Yeah, I talked to him about it. I didn't watch it. I have no desire to watch myself, but I was on that. So I know that there's been a little scrutiny, but yeah, knowing some of the players involved and the money the money must be so easy.
Oh yeah.
The ingredients so cheap.
They can get the kratom very cheap. And I interviewed Scott a couple of weeks ago and I thought you looked familiar. Now I did watch his YouTube and now it's ringing a bell. I can see you. Yeah. And it's also tied to the whole supplement industry. There's a lot of grift.
Right. It's the same. Exactly.
The law that allows that. There's a lot of problems with just a lot of over-the-counter stuff. Let's switching back gears. If you had one tip to tell people how to quit kratom, what would your recommendation be?
Easy. The best thing you can do is you have to tell somebody. You have to tell somebody that's not like your pet. You got to tell somebody, because once you tell somebody, it's out there and you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. You have crossed the Rubicon. If you're assuming you're trying to hide.
Yeah.
Because I was. And I think a lot of people were. So assuming nobody thinks that you're cracked out on kratom and you're trying to hide it, the number one thing you can do is tell two people. Make some accountability for yourself, because if you don't, you'll always be able to say, tomorrow, I'll quit tomorrow. But if you tell somebody, it's real. And that's what I did. And it wasn't fun, but I made it out the other side. And I think if a guy with a 2 case a day, $250 a day habit can live through it, I think anybody else can too. But definitely tell somebody and try to be positive, because there will be days that absolutely suck.
If you were going to give yourself a note, and from a note to yourself for August 2025, what would you say to yourself, the future you?
In regards to anything, or in regards to this topic?
Yeah, mostly about this experience, about recovery.
Oh, it will always be thankful for the fact that it made you deeper. Because I think I learned a lot of empathy going through some of the stuff. I think I can see what a lot of other people go through. And at one point I would have been like, hey, I guess you shouldn't have picked up that crack pipe, huh? But now, once you're there and you've walked in the shoes, like I said, I don't necessarily know if it's good or bad, but I feel like I'm deeper. And I would tell myself that's one good thing that came out of it, despite all the negative shit.
Okay. And anything to wrap up? Anything you want to say before we say goodbye?
No, well, I want to thank you for having me on. I want to thank you for the work you do. I think it's great that you guys have this podcast. I was happy to find it. Lucky to find it. I think everybody in the sub on Reddit is great. Thanks everybody for being despite the Suboxone stuff, not being like a social media hellhole. Everybody's very nice and helpful, and keep being that way. And if you're struggling, tell somebody and it will get better. But that's the first step.
Yeah, there is hope. And it feels like you're going to be stuck and it's something you can't get out of, but it's totally possible. So thanks a lot, Frank.
Appreciate it. You have a great evening.
You too.
Talk to you. Bye-bye.
Kratom in the headlines. Hi everyone, this is Jasmine, and I'll be covering this week's Kratom in the headlines. This week we have an article from the Epic Times. This article is titled Kratom, Opioid-like Herb with Health and Addiction Risk, Doctors Voice Concerns. So this article is just that, doctors speaking out about potential concerns of kratom usage. The article quotes, doctors should ask their patients about kratom use the same way they would for cannabis, cocaine, methamphetamine, or heroin. And the article interviews a doctor named Dr. Eileen Barrett, who says, I have taken care of people who have been affected by their kratom use, likely more than I knew, since people commonly don't report use due to fear of stigma, not thinking it was relevant to their health problem. And this is really interesting because when I first opened up about my kratom addiction to my doctor, she had no idea what kratom was. She had to actually research it to be able to help me. The article also states that lower doses act as a stimulant, higher doses similar to an opioid effect that can cause tolerance, dependence, and withdrawals. The article also states that the Drug Enforcement Administration has listed kratom as a drug of chemical concern because its addiction potential and sedative effects. It is not approved by the Food and Drug Administration for medical use, and the agency considers kratom and food additives that contain it as unsafe. It also says that these products cannot lawfully be marketed in the United States. Side effects of using kratom and kratom disorder include cardiovascular issues, gastrointestinal issues, neurological problems, and psychiatric issues with irritability, agitation, and depressed mood. And then withdrawal symptoms can include agitation, muscle aches, and depression. And the article also speaks about kratom overdoses, saying that kratom has been linked to overdose deaths, although the rate remains low compared with other drugs. A 2019 report noted that 11 kratom-related deaths from 2011 to 2017, while there were about 200,000 opioid-related deaths that occurred during the same time period, was substantially lower, but those rates are growing and growing. And then it also says that a rise in adverse effects and fatalities may be linked to the higher concentration of alkaloids in many commercial kratom extracts or isolates. Traditional kratom preparations, which involve drying and grinding of the leaves into powder, result in a much lower level of health concerns. So we're seeing a bigger issue here with extracts, which are much more highly concentrated than the powder form typically. So Jack Henningfield, the Vice President of Research, Health Policy, and Abuse Liability at Penny Advocates and an adjunct professor of behavioral biology at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, quotes that the major public health risk related to kratom would be a ban on kratom access that could drive those who use kratom as a path away from opioids instead of back to deadly and highly addictive opioids. This is something that we obviously hear a lot about, people using kratom to wean off of and harder drugs, but unfortunately a lot of the time they do end up getting addicted to kratom. So still an issue there in my opinion, but currently there are no established treatment protocols for kratom use disorder because of limited medical research, and it's not yet recognized in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Therefore, the commentary's author call for developing practice standards for identifying and treating the condition. Basically, this article is urging and encouraging doctors to ask for their patient's reason for using kratom, to treat kratom as they would any other drug, but also for the patient to be open with their doctor about their usage of kratom. So I think this is a really insightful article here and provides a lot of insight as far as people just opening up more about the topic of kratom abuse disorder. This is Kratom in the Headlines. Thank you for listening.
Resource of the week. Hey, Kratom Quitters. This is Jacob, and I am here to bring you our resource of the week. So this week, we don't have anything fancy for you to buy or a external program to recommend or a supplement or anything like that. This week, our resource is a relatively simple and straightforward exercise recommendation. So one of the most common things you'll hear people in kratom recovery suggest for mitigation of withdrawal symptoms or to help with recovery is exercise. I could not agree more. Exercise has been very key for me in my recovery. However, in the acute phase, I found it very hard to get motivated to exercise. I don't know about you all, but when I'm feeling like crap, the last thing I want to do is go to the gym and lift heavy weights or really hit the cardio machines hard. It's just not something I really ever felt up to doing when I was in the thick of a bad acute withdrawal from kratom. However, what I have found to be pretty effective is a simple walk. I tend to try to shoot for the 30 to hour long or 30 minute to hour long range for my walk duration in the acute phase. But really, whatever you can do, if you can only do 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever the case may be, if you can get up and get out there and go for a walk, I promise you'll feel a little bit better. You're not going to feel a million times better. You're not going to negate all of those withdrawals that can be pretty bad, depending on the severity of your addiction and the duration and all that fun stuff. But I will tell you that you will get the blood pumping, you will get some endorphins going, and you will feel a little bit better. It'll also allow you to realize that the mind is super powerful. So we can often psych ourselves up and make things worse than they actually are. So what I've found is that as I am going through the acute detox, as I'm going for my walks every day, I'm building healthy habits, interacting with the people that I walk by, I'm starting to see that life can be fun and can be okay without kratom as a part of it. So for all those reasons, this week's resource is super simple, and it's really just to do a little bit of exercise, go for a walk, maybe a very low impact short bike ride, whatever exercise that is low impact and you believe is relatively easy to do and that you feel like you're up to doing. I would recommend going and doing it. Push through those negative thoughts. Worst thing that happens is maybe you're out there, go for a couple of minutes and you realize I can only go a couple of minutes. I need to go home because I'm really feeling terrible. And that's okay. I will promise you though that whatever little amount of exercise you're able to do, you will feel a little bit better. And if you can build from there, it'll help you build some healthy habits that will serve you well as you advance out of the acute phase and into longer term recovery and ultimately get past this kratom addiction that's been holding you back. So that's it for this week's resource. Pretty straightforward and simple. I hope it's helpful, and I hope you all keep it kratom free.